Here is another case that is interesting to take a note of. This is an intact glassy tube showing very nicely the banded structure and the sort of membranes that join the bands, and the translucence you can see faintly through to the other side. And here's a large boulder that is rolled in and banged into the glassy tube and broken it. And here is the broken off portion of the tube. You can see it was severed here. And here's the broken off portion, and you can see the broken off portion of the bands are very spindly and very bony looking. And moreover, you can see that this broken portion of the tube has been flattened, and we can see both the under part of the bands and the over part of the bands equally bright. And there are twice as many of these bands for every one there is of these, of the intact circular tube that where we can only see the underbands faintly through. And down here is another place where a boulder has damaged the same tube, and this section is completely flattened. So we get the double spacing and this bent appearance of the tubes that have been broken and flattened, and this appearance for the tubes that are still intact. Finally, we see, I'll just show these last examples. Perpendicular intersections is no problems, junctures, and yes, there are terminals for the tubes where lots of them seem to come in from different directions and join in one place. Very reminiscent of some transportation systems on Earth. We don't know what the glassy tubes are, but they certainly are suggestive of artificial things in many ways, as shown in this artist's concept. This is not taken by an astronaut on the Martian surface, but this is what an artist's rendition of what perhaps someday soon we will see in pictures coming back from Mars. Whatever they are certain to be interesting indeed. Here's that seahorse feature I mentioned. There's a glassy tube running along its lower length. This is in a portion of Mars in the Cydonia region in which we see lots and lots and lots of shapes. There are so many shapes concentrated in that region that it's hard to ignore them all, even though we can't prove artificiality for any of them. But because there is a context for them, and there are relationships among the shapes, and this provides evidence that these are artificial objects rather than objects seen in clouds. These things tend to cluster by type. This is a small animal of some sort, an aviary flying object of some sort, an aquatic object of some sort, and an insect object of some sort. What's mostly significant here is not the examples I'm showing you, but that like type of objects tend to cluster together. So the aquatics are one area, the insects in another, the mammals in another, and so on. So it's their relationship to one another that gives it away that this has been designed. It's not an accident, though you could argue that any one of them was an accident. Here's another example of a not very impressive object. This one's not at Cydonia, but this turned up in a high-resolution image, and someone said, well, gee, my artistic mind says that looks sort of like a puma. But it's not all that impressive, but we now know that we shouldn't dismiss these things out of hand. He said, well, I tell you what, either this is an accident of nature or it's a puma, another example of an artistic image on Mars. And he says, it's cut off here, so we don't see the hindquarters. If this is any kind of an animal, he says, don't take puma literally, but if this is any kind of an animal depiction, then it ought to have a hindquarters with a tail. And if it's not, it won't. So the scientists predicted that this would be seen someday when we got a high-resolution view of the hindquarters. Well, the Mars Mars Express spacecraft came to the rescue, and even though it's not a high-resolution view, we have a low-resolution view there, and I'm going to try once more to magnify that. No, it's just not, my magnifier is not working. So I'm going to have to ask you to go by the view that we have there, or perhaps those of you in the front row can see it. But it shows very plainly in the Mars Express view that the animal has a tail and its hindquarters with its legs sticking out and its tail facing out, pretty much as predicted, except it has a typical feline kink in the tail in the rear quarters. But it's right size, shape, location, and orientation to be a tail. And this is, again, an example of an a priori prediction, the kind that scientists are supposed to pay attention to, whatever the outcome. If it fails, you dismiss it. If it passes, you must pay attention no matter what your biases are. And this is an a priori prediction of an artificial object where the test results said, yes, this is an artificial object. Here's an example of what I mean by clustering. This is a strip image in the Cydonia region, and this is what made us start to think about what's really going on here. This is that seahorse image I showed you, and it's sort of in a dark region as some of the other aquatic images are, and this is sort of like a fish-like image with a possible hermit crab shell there and so on. We began to think of this as the water area on Mars. And these look like possible underground sea bottom plant life and so on. And we said, well, all right, if that was so, what's right above that? And when we looked at this close up, the streak patterns here and the way they abruptly end at the bottom was very suggestive of a portrayal of a waterfall. And above that, we saw things that were suggestive of possible icebergs, possible mountains. That was all we had at that point in time, and we said, well, this is starting to look more and more as though it could be a possible coherent mosaic, a possible coherent painting on the surface of Mars. If that's so, before we find out what's there, we should predict what would be next. What would be above mountains or above the landscape? We said, well, the predictions we made were it would probably be a portrayal of clouds, which could look like a lot of things, so it probably wouldn't be very impressive. But maybe we'll get lucky and there'll be a plane or a spaceship in the sky or something like that. Well, again, I apologize that I can't show you the magnified view. Did we lose our image over there? Okay. What we actually saw in the top part of the image was a series of little white mounds all over the place, dotting what should have been the sky. And it's the only place on Mars or anywhere in the solar system where we've seen something on the ground that looks like a star map. And that wasn't what we predicted, but it sure does fit the scenario that this is a coherent mosaic with a theme to it. We see many patterns on the ground, some not so impressive, some more so. But we've now learned to start paying attention to them, even when they're as weak as this one. Because sometimes there is a lot of detail there, more than probably could occur by chance, and we're eventually going to have the chance to get both higher resolution and color for these images. That one may not be impressive, but this one has a reason to take it seriously. This is what's actually on Mars. This is an artistic enhancement. Anything with white lines or coloration added is artistically enhanced. But even on the actual image from Mars, we can see that there's actual hair on the image, eyes, a nose, a mouth, a definite outline of a face, of a body, and so on. Those lines are all there. They're not just imagination. And it looks like the portrayal of a humanoid child. Well, we've never seen one like that anywhere else in the solar system but this one. Where is it? 2 kilometers north of the face on Mars. Again, relationships. Humanoid child next to a possible portrayal of a humanoid adult. Next to this guy. Here's another face profile because it's a profile. It's hard to prove artificiality, but it's in the Cydonia region too, artistically enhanced here.